Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me tell you how I see it. When I go through the list, I go back to business perspective in the past and remember a very old term, the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goals. And that's really what I see this as, the list of the big, hairy, audacious goals. Without any details under them, just to say this is a vision of have we considered and would we consider to be able to look at it, because some of these things obviously will take years to be able to think through and to be able to gather data to be able to go through. Can I ask just a couple of specific questions on this? How many of these big, hairy, audacious goals that you're laying out there in different vision ideas are coming from GAO high-risk lists or Inspector General reports, or from previous administrations to say this is something that's out there that's been considered for a while? I know a lot of these things were bottom-up from different agencies or different individuals that work in agencies say this is something we should consider. How many of them are specifically GAO, IG, or previous administration?
So there's about 20 of the 32 proposals have input or a significant fact base derived from the GAO reports. When I talk about the highest level, and I talked to Jean Dodaro about the proposals, we agreed it's probably about 40% of the proposals are effectively, if not identical, fairly close to what's been recommended by GAO.
What about from previous administrations? How far back do you want to go?
I don't have that. I could look at the exact numbers. Many of them, I would say probably 10 to 12 include items from previous administrations.
Right. Jay Johnson spent a lot of time with this committee going through DHS and the restructuring and the requests, and brought multiple requests to us on what to be able to do to be able to help some of the process in that particular entity. So we're familiar with dealing with those. We've had a lot of debate on what that would look like, and we'll look forward to continuing to be able to get information as these continue to get fleshed out in the future. Let me ask a question that Senator McCaskill had asked as well. How do we get a good balance between what the administration already has authority to do and what the administration does not have authority? That's obviously going to be a longer deliberative process. And you mentioned already security clearances is one of those.
Right. So our estimate is there are about 10 to 12 proposals that do not require legislative activity, in addition to some of the agency-specific proposals that were included in the 2019 budget. So things like the customer experience idea that I mentioned, things like what we're doing on cyber workforce, but even that one, I think there could be additive areas of input from Congress. So on even some of the things we could do ourselves, that might be part of a broader proposal.
Okay, that's helpful. To be able to get, we'll try to work through that process together, but that'll be a clear, that's a clear line for us that we've got to be able to know what's our part, what's this administration's part, and what they're already taking on. Let me bring up something else this committee has spent a lot of time talking about, and it's real property. You addressed this as one of the ideas in trying to be able to resolve this. It's one of the things we've started looking at with how GSA disposes of properties that's either underutilized or unutilized property, but also how we're doing leasing or buying. Recently, I was going through some reports and looked at the request for the Department of Transportation headquarters here in Washington, D.C. They're requesting to be able to buy the facility. Well, that's a great idea. It's the headquarters. We'll probably have a Department of Transportation for a very long time. We should probably own the facility. The problem is we've been leasing that facility for 15 years at approximately a cost of $750 million to lease it for 15 years. Now we're being offered to buy the facility for $750 million. We're paying for the building twice.
Right.
The first 15 years, there's very little maintenance of the building.
Right.
So for the owner of the building to lease it to us, it's no skin off their nose because air conditioners are going to work, all those kind of things. That's not an issue. Now it will be, and we're going to own it then. It was a terrible idea 15 years ago. Trying to be able to fix how we're disposing of property when we're buying and leasing property. This is a very big issue. This committee, Senator Carper, spent a lot of time on this issue. What are some of the proposals that you're already looking at for that area?
So I think it's a great idea. One of the very specific things that gets to the heart of this idea is the Federal Capital Revolving Fund. Back in business school, there's a very classic finance truism, when you compare a lease-buy decision, usually the only rational economic reason for a lease decision is if there's a tax benefit to that decision. And obviously, government doesn't have a tax benefit for that decision. The other reality could be a cash flow consideration and how the actual money gets allocated. And very often, some of our leasing decisions are made because of the nature of the appropriations process. So what's in the proposal actually looks at a federal capital revolving fund that would essentially free us up to make more rational decisions about a lease-buy decision if we really think the asset would be valuable for us in the long term.
One of the things that you looked at was a territorial issue of who kind of runs this space and who has this lane, whether that be in small business lending and small business programs, which are scattered all over the federal government, whether that be in veteran cemeteries, which are also scattered all over multiple agencies, whether that be in other projects and other grant making, which again is scattered everywhere. How did you make the determination to say that there's a wide variety of entities doing basically the same thing? We need to be able to consolidate, or do we need to be able to streamline that within the agencies?
Yeah, I think that there are a number of things, again, in the proposal that speak to, how do we leverage data to really be much more thoughtful about how we're making decisions. That's very much something in the private sector. And so relocation analytics and being more thoughtful about that are critical components of the proposal. A range of smarter leasing activities that will allow us to make improvements to how we make decision about our leasing decisions. And then the number of process improvements included build on the FASTA work that has already been put in place. So I think there are a range of ideas that are fairly tangible and designed to provide incentives for agencies to do the right thing that perhaps they don't have those incentives today, and then to provide data to make it easier for them to do that.
Okay. If I could say this, Mr. Chairman, as well, Senator Heitkamp and I are visiting in a hearing on the Office of Personnel Management coming up very soon. There are 7 areas that OPM has responsibility for. 5 of those you're recommending transferring out. The other 2 is left undefined, and we don't know what that is, if it stays there, or if there's a future plan for that as well. But that's an area that we're going to continue to be able to focus in on. Obviously, there's lots of issues with OPM that are historic issues there that absolutely affect our federal retiring workforce dramatically. And so we're going to continue on with ongoing hearings to be able to drill down a little bit more in that particular area.
I look forward to that because it's critical.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.